Thunder cracked across the midnight sky, rattling the windows of every silent house in the old neighborhood. Lightning stitched jagged lines of white across a world soaked in relentless rain. In a back alley, behind a row of shuttered shops, water pooled beneath a rusted dumpster, and there, huddled in a trembling heap, was a battered figure no one was supposed to see. The dog's name was Scout, though nobody in this city knew that yet. His fur, once a pale gold, was matted with mud, tangled with burrs, and streaked with dark, fresh blood. His ribs pressed painfully against skin stretched too thin, and his eyes were wild with fear, scanning the shadows for threats that had haunted him all his short life. The storm wasn't what terrified him. It was a familiar kind of chaos, but nothing compared to the hands that had dragged him, kicked him, forced him to perform over and over again until something inside him had broken. Somewhere, buried deep beneath the garbage and the drumming rain, Scout's memory flickered with images. Iron gates, the reek of bleach and dog sweat, the crack of a whip, the harsh bark of a man's voice ordering no, as electric pain shot through his body. In those flashes, the thunder outside seemed to echo the terror inside his chest. A sudden crash, a metal trash can blown over by the wind, sent Scout's heart leaping. He whimpered, tried to push himself deeper under the dumpster, claws scraping on cold concrete. But he was spent. Hunger gnawed at him. Every breath hurt. There, in the numbing rain, he felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel before. Maybe this was it. Maybe if he just lay still, invisible, the pain would end. For a moment, Scout closed his eyes, too tired to keep fighting. His breathing slowed, chest rising and falling with each shallow gasp. Footsteps splashed through the puddles, slow and heavy, like someone dragging the world behind them. At first, Scout didn't notice, lost in the swirl of rain and memory. But then, closer, the crunch of boots on gravel, the jangle of keys. He forced one eye open and saw a shape appear at the mouth of the alley, haloed in the stark blue-white light of the storm. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a firefighter's jacket draped over his arm and exhaustion stamped across his face. This was Ethan Carter, walking home from the night shift, keys clenched in his fist, head bowed as if trying to shield himself from more than just the rain. Ethan was used to the quiet after midnight, used to the city's secrets. But tonight, something made him stop. A sound, barely there, softer than the rain, a whimper so faint it could have been a trick of the wind. He turned, scanning the alley, and saw movement under the dumpster. He stepped closer, careful, heart beating a little faster. There it was again. A whimper, almost pleading. He knelt, ignoring the rain soaking through his jeans, and peered into the shadows. For one long moment, man and dog stared at each other, both frozen by fear and memories they couldn't name. Scout's eyes were wide, frantic, ready to bolt, but too weak to do anything more than tremble. Ethan's own heart twisted, not just with pity, but with a sudden sharp ache, a flash of memory, another pair of canine eyes looking up at him through smoke and dust, years ago, in another storm far from home. The loss of his military K9 partner, Axel, still burned inside him like a wound that refused to heal. In the downpour, he heard Axel's dying whine, and for a moment, Ethan's vision blurred with old pain. But this was a new night, and there was a dog right here that needed him. Ethan shrugged out of his jacket and slowly, without making sudden movements, stretched it toward Scout. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured, voice rough but gentle, words nearly swallowed by the storm. Scout flinched at the sound, but didn't run. He was too tired, too broken to resist. When Ethan finally inched close enough, he saw the open wounds, the old scars, and the haunted look that said this dog had survived hell. Lightning flashed again, lighting up Ethan's face and Scout's body. Ethan swallowed hard, his breath catching as he realized just how bad it was. "Oh, man," he whispered, reaching out a hand, letting it hover for a second before gently placing it on Scout's side. The dog shuddered, but didn't snap, didn't bite, just whimpered again. Eyes locked on Ethan's. For a second, time seemed to freeze. The only sound was the storm and the desperate pulse of two broken hearts finding each other in the dark. Ethan didn't care about the mud or the rain anymore. He slipped his arms under Scout, wincing at the sharp yelp of pain, and gathered the trembling dog against his chest. "I got you. I got you," he repeated, as much to himself as to the animal. The dog was lighter than he should have been, far too light. Ethan could feel every bone, every shiver through the jacket. He looked up at the sky and, for the first time in a long while, felt something like purpose pierce the gray fog of his thoughts. Carrying Scout out of the alley, Ethan tried to move quickly but gently, every step a negotiation between urgency and care. His own apartment was just a block away, warm and safe, a world apart from this misery. As they left the alley behind, Ethan glanced back once as if making sure nothing followed them. The past, perhaps, or the men who had done this. But in that moment, as the rain washed away some of the blood and dirt, something new began for both of them. Under the sickly glow of a street lamp, Ethan and Scout made their way through the storm. Two souls, each with scars the world couldn't see, each searching for a reason to believe in tomorrow. That night, neither knew what was coming. Neither could guess how much they would need each other to heal. But as Ethan pushed open his front door and Scout, shivering, looked up with one last flicker of hope in his battered eyes, the story of their survival, of their redemption, had truly begun. The storm raged on as Ethan gently closed his apartment door behind him, trying not to jostle the fragile dog cradled in his arms. The sharp electric tang of rain still clung to both man and animal, and Scout's entire body shook, not just from the cold, but from something older and deeper. Ethan glanced around his small living room, eyes landing on the battered old couch and the framed photograph on the mantel. A younger version of himself, smiling beside a proud German shepherd wearing a K9 badge. He paused, swallowing hard. Axel. For a brief second, Ethan could almost hear Axel's tail thumping the floor in greeting. He blinked away the memory and refocused on the trembling life in his arms. Setting Scout down on a pile of clean towels beside the radiator, Ethan moved quickly but gently, wrapping the dog in his firefighter jacket, the only thing he had that could offer warmth. Scout tensed as the fabric brushed his side, eyes darting from the unfamiliar walls to Ethan's face and back again. "Easy, buddy. Easy. You're safe now, I promise," Ethan whispered, his words almost lost to the steady drum of rain against the windows. He kept his voice low and calm, every movement deliberate and soft. Years of experience with frightened animals and haunted people had taught Ethan that healing started with patience. He reached for his phone and called the emergency vet, explaining the situation in a hushed, urgent tone. The vet's voice on the other end was practical but kind. "Bring him in," they said. "We'll be ready." But Ethan knew Scout wouldn't survive another wild ride through the storm tonight. He'd have to do what he could at home, at least until morning. He returned to Scout's side with a first aid kit, a bowl of water, and a can of chicken broth. The dog's eyes flickered to the bowl, then away, too wary to move. "It's all right," Ethan murmured, kneeling beside him. He cleaned Scout's wounds with gentle, practiced hands, wincing every time the dog flinched. Blood matted the fur along Scout's ribs and haunches, some wounds fresh, others half-healed and scarred over. As Ethan worked, he noticed the faded tattoo on the dog's ear, a number. Government issue. K9 training facility. His jaw clenched. Scout whimpered, more from memory than pain. The smell of disinfectant, the feel of hands on his skin. These things had always meant danger. But Ethan's touch was different. Slow, careful, never forcing, never cruel. "You're okay, Scout. You're okay," Ethan said again, voice as steady as he could manage. He used a soft towel to dry the worst of the rain from Scout's fur, then draped the firefighter jacket over him again. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the occasional crash of thunder. Scout didn't try to run. He didn't even try to bite. He just lay there, eyes half-lidded, as if waiting for pain that never came. Ethan watched him with a quiet awe. So much damage, and yet a flicker of trust had survived. "You're a tough one, huh?" Ethan said with a tired smile. He set the bowl of chicken broth next to Scout's nose. The dog sniffed it, hesitated, then took a cautious sip. Progress. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. It was well past midnight when Ethan finally sat down on the floor, leaning his back against the couch. He watched Scout through half-closed eyes, mind racing with memories and fears he'd tried for years to lock away. The storm had slowed to a dull, steady rain, and the apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the soft sound of Scout's shallow breaths. In his sleep, Scout whimpered, a soft, heartbroken sound that made Ethan's chest tighten. The dog's legs twitched, ears flicking back as if fending off ghosts. Ethan, without thinking, scooted closer and laid a gentle hand on Scout's back. The dog stilled, the nightmare loosening its grip, but didn't wake. Ethan found himself whispering, "You're safe, buddy. I'm right here." His voice trembled. The words meant as much for himself as for the dog beside him. He stayed there for a long time, the warmth of the radiator and the rhythm of Scout's breathing soothing something raw inside him. In the dim light, his gaze drifted again to the mantel, to the photograph of Axel. "Wish you were here, old friend," Ethan murmured. "You'd know what to do." The room felt impossibly large, filled with all the things left unsaid between men and dogs who'd seen too much together. After a while, Ethan rose and moved quietly to his bedroom. He pulled an extra blanket from the closet and draped it over Scout, then made up a bed for himself on the couch. He didn't want to leave Scout alone, not even for a moment. The dog's presence in his apartment changed the atmosphere entirely. The air seemed charged, tense with pain, but also with possibility. Before turning out the light, Ethan walked over to the mantel. He picked up the photograph, thumb tracing the line of Axel's broad back. "I found another one, Ax," he whispered. "He needs help. Maybe I do too." He set the picture down and stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain. Then, as if seeking comfort from the only soul who could understand, he looked down at Scout. The dog stirred, eyes opening just enough to meet Ethan's gaze. For a second, man and dog were joined by more than circumstance. A pact was made in that silence. To try, to fight, to heal. Ethan returned to the couch and lay there, unable to sleep, mind turning over what to do next. In the darkness, he spoke to the room, to Scout, to Axel, to himself. "We'll get through tonight. We'll figure it out tomorrow." He tried to believe it, tried to let hope take root. Dawn crept slowly through the rain-streaked windows, painting the apartment in pale gray. Scout had not moved from his spot beside the radiator, but something had shifted. His breathing was deeper, his body less rigid, as if he'd finally surrendered, at least for now, to safety. Ethan stirred, groggy and stiff, and the first thing he did was check on the dog. The bowl of broth was empty. Scout looked up, wary but no longer desperate, and Ethan felt a surge of relief. "Good morning, Scout," he said softly. The name stuck. "Ready for a fresh start?" There would be wounds to tend, calls to make, and 1,000 tiny steps toward trust ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the faintest spark of hope. He reached out a hand, palm open and steady. Scout stared, then, almost imperceptibly, nudged his nose against Ethan's fingers. Outside, the rain slowed to a stop. Inside, the silence was warm, full of the promise that, against all odds, the worst night might finally be over, and something better just might begin. The storm had passed, but the air inside Ethan's apartment was still heavy, charged with the aftermath of fear and uncertainty. Early morning light crept through the curtains, painting soft stripes across the floor and casting a gentle glow on Scout's battered frame. The dog hadn't moved much during the night, curled into a cautious ball beside the radiator, wrapped in Ethan's Firefighter jacket. The first rays of sunlight didn't coax him out. They only seemed to spotlight the silent bond growing between the two survivors. Ethan awoke on the couch, his body stiff from a restless sleep. For a moment he didn't move, just listened. The apartment was so quiet he could hear the tick of the old wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. No traffic outside, no sirens, just the muted hush that comes after a long night of rain. He rolled onto his side, careful not to startle Scout, and studied the dog's stillness. There was something sacred about these early hours, as if any loud noise might shatter the fragile peace settling in the room. He moved slowly, stretching his sore back, then quietly made his way to the kitchen. Every step was deliberate, every motion gentle, as though he were walking through a room full of sleeping ghosts. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter scent filling the silence, and glanced toward the radiator. Scout's eyes were open, following Ethan's movements with quiet wariness. The dog didn't flinch, but he didn't move either. His world was still made up of uncertainty, friend or foe, safety or threat. Ethan placed his mug down and walked to the fridge. He took out a small piece of cooked chicken, set it on a plate, and brought it over to Scout. "Here you go, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down. He set the plate just within reach, then backed away, giving the dog space. For a long moment, Scout just stared at the offering, nose twitching, ears pricked. Hunger gnawed at him, but trust was slower to come. He crept forward, almost dragging himself, and ate a few tentative bites before retreating to his corner. Ethan watched in silence, resisting the urge to reach out. Let it happen in its own time. The house was quiet in a way that made every sound feel significant. Ethan's own breathing, the click of Scout's claws on the wood floor, the shifting of the old couch springs. Each noise carried a weight. Scout spent most of the day lying low, eyes half-lidded, but never quite letting himself drift off completely. Every sudden sound, a car door slamming outside, the buzz of Ethan's phone, made him tense up, body rigid, ready to flee if necessary. There were no words to reassure him, no quick fix. Healing would be a process measured in days, maybe weeks. Ethan tried to go about his morning routine, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Scout. He brewed another pot of coffee, made a piece of toast, and turned on the small TV for background noise. An old sitcom played, laugh track echoing through the apartment, but it felt hollow, out of place. He turned it off. Silence again. He sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the worn surface, and looked at the framed photo of Axel. It was still hard to meet those eyes, full of loyalty and trust, memories of dusty fields and barking commands. He found himself reaching for a notebook, dusting off the cover. It had been years since he'd written anything for himself. Notes, sure, firehouse rosters, emergency checklists, but never anything personal. He stared at the blank page, pen poised in trembling fingers. For a moment he hesitated. Then he began to write. Not for anyone else, not for some official report, but for himself. The words came slowly, jagged and raw. Scout showed up last night. Looks like he's been through hell. Reminds me of Axel in those last days. Scared, but something still burning inside. I don't know if I can do this again, but maybe I have to try. Maybe he's here for a reason. Writing those sentences didn't solve anything, but it loosened something tight in Ethan's chest. He closed the notebook and set it aside, feeling the tiniest flicker of relief. Later, he made his way back to Scout, crouching a few feet away, letting the dog see him, smell him, decide for himself if he wanted company. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Ethan murmured. Scout's gaze met his for a heartbeat, and in that look, Ethan saw exhaustion and hope wrestling in the animal's eyes. He wanted to reach out, but instead, he just sat there on the floor, present but not demanding. Sometimes, the hardest thing is just to be there. As the hours passed, Ethan moved through the house with care. When he had to leave the room, he left the door open, making sure Scout never felt trapped. He placed the dog's food bowl near his own seat at the table, a small gesture that meant everything. Whenever Ethan ate, he made sure Scout's bowl was full. He wanted the dog to know he belonged. That afternoon, Ethan took a call from a friend at the firehouse, updating them on his leave of absence. Yeah, I'm all right. Just need some time, he said, his gaze never leaving Scout. The friend offered words of encouragement, but Ethan barely heard them. When the call ended, he sat in silence, his own mind swirling with doubts and memories. Axel's loss, the endless cycles of trauma and recovery, the fear that he'd never really heal. But as he watched Scout, still wary, still wounded, but alive, he wondered if maybe helping this dog was the first step back for both of them. As dusk settled, Ethan dimmed the lights, a small accommodation for Scout's obvious discomfort with brightness. He checked the locks, more out of habit than necessity, but the ritual was comforting. Scout watched him, head on paws, eyes tracking every movement. The old anxiety clawed at Ethan. Shadows seemed to stretch longer at night, memories creeping out from the corners. He closed the curtains and double-checked the windows, then returned to Scout's side. He sat on the floor again, this time closer, but still with enough space for Scout to move away. He pulled out his notebook and wrote another line. First day, not much progress, but we're both still here. He closed the book and set it aside, letting his hand rest on the floor, palm up, a silent invitation. After a long while, Scout shifted, stretched out a trembling paw, and rested it near Ethan's fingers. Not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. The apartment was still and silent, but for the first time since Scout arrived, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something, an unspoken promise between two souls trying to find their way back from the edge. Morning arrived softly, spilling pale light through the slats of Ethan's living room blinds. It painted gentle stripes across the hardwood floor and caught in the golden highlights of Scout's fur, now brushed and cleaner after a second night indoors. The dog slept curled up by the radiator, the firefighter jacket still draped across his back. He had eaten a little more each day, though never while Ethan watched, and the trembling that racked his body at the slightest sound seemed to be easing, if only just. Ethan woke early, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and breathing in the quiet hush that filled his apartment. He moved carefully, making as little noise as possible. Every gesture was slow, every footfall soft, out of respect for the trauma that had shaped Scout's world. After his usual cup of black coffee and a few moments staring out the window at the dew-soaked street, Ethan padded over to where Scout lay. He crouched, holding out a fresh piece of chicken in his palm, and waited, silent and still. Scout's eyes opened. At first, suspicion flickered across his gaze, a shadow of memory, the residue of hurt. But hunger and curiosity worked in tandem. He inched forward, sniffed the air, then hesitantly licked the meat from Ethan's hand before backing away, settling with his back against the radiator once again. Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that seemed to brighten the room just a little. "Good job, Scout," he whispered, tucking the memory away like a fragile treasure. The apartment was filled with the small, cautious rituals of two beings learning to live together. Scout watched Ethan move from room to room, studying his patterns, learning that the slam of a cupboard door or the ring of a phone no longer meant danger. For his part, Ethan kept the radio low, the lights soft, the house quiet, but not silent. Each day, Scout seemed to relax a little more, his tail flicking in curiosity rather than fear. On the third morning, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, he caught a movement out of the corner of his eye. Scout had wandered into the living room, nose twitching, ears perked, tail hanging low but no longer tucked. Something in the dog's bearing had shifted. Cautious, yes, but also curious. Ethan pretended not to notice, focusing instead on his coffee and the crossword puzzle he rarely finished. Scout inched closer, sniffing a faded tennis ball that had rolled beneath the couch months before and been forgotten. Scout nudged the ball with his nose, then with a tentative paw. It rolled a few inches and bumped against Ethan's shoe. The man looked down, heart pounding. He didn't move, just met Scout's gaze and smiled. "That yours?" he asked softly, voice careful, as if not to break the spell. For a moment, neither moved. Then Scout nudged the ball again, watching to see what Ethan would do. Ethan didn't reach for the toy. Instead, he leaned back, letting Scout set the pace. Trust was a fragile thing. He knew better than to force it. After a minute, Scout pushed the ball across the floor. The action awkward but unmistakably playful. A ripple of hope moved through Ethan. It was the first real sign that Scout's spirit, beaten but not broken, still held a capacity for joy. Later that day, as rain tapped quietly at the window panes, Ethan sat on the rug, reading from an old journal. Scout crept over, watching with wide, searching eyes. Without looking up, Ethan began to speak. Not to Scout, not really, but to the empty space between memory and now. "I used to have a partner," he murmured, voice thick with the weight of loss. "Axel, smartest dog I ever knew. Brave, too. Saved my life more than once." His words trailed off, memories swirling like dust in sunlight. Scout settled nearby, as if drawn by the sound of Ethan's voice. After a long silence, the dog reached out and rested a tentative paw on Ethan's knee. The touch was featherlight but unmistakable, a bridge across the gulf of pain and mistrust. Ethan froze, caught off guard by the simple, hopeful gesture. He looked down, met Scout's eyes, and for a second, the grief that had closed him off from the world loosened its grip. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered. "You miss someone too, don't you?" They sat together in silence, the weight of their pasts hovering in the air but not crushing them. It was a new kind of quiet, no longer haunted, but expectant, like the hush before sunrise. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to hope that this broken dog might help him piece together his own fractured heart. Over the next few days, small signs of progress appeared, each one a tiny victory. Scout began to follow Ethan from room to room, always at a cautious distance but never out of sight. He ate with more confidence, sometimes even accepting treats from Ethan's hand. When the world outside grew loud, sirens, thunder, the slam of a distant car door, Scout no longer cowered in terror, but looked to Ethan for reassurance, watching his calm face, listening for the steady, soothing rhythm of his voice. One quiet afternoon, Ethan put on his boots and coat, preparing to step outside for a walk. He glanced at Scout, not expecting much, but the dog rose to his feet and padded over, eyes wide with anticipation and nervousness. "You want to come?" Ethan asked, voice light. He opened the door slowly, and to his surprise, Scout followed, tail wagging just slightly, ears flicked back but not flat in fear. They walked the block together, Ethan taking small, slow steps, Scout moving at his own uncertain pace. The world was full of unfamiliar sounds and smells, but with Ethan beside him, Scout managed to keep his head up, body trembling but moving forward. The days settled into a tentative rhythm. In the evenings, Ethan would tell Scout stories about Axel, about firehouse calls and quiet nights on patrol. Sometimes the memories were too raw, his voice breaking with old pain. But Scout listened, his presence a balm to wounds Ethan had hidden from the world for too long. The bond between them grew in quiet ways, a paw on a knee, a tail thump against the floor, the way Scout would curl beside Ethan's chair when he wrote in his journal. Then one morning, something changed. Ethan prepared to leave for the grocery store, keys jingling in his hand. Scout rose, trotted to the door, and waited. He looked up at Ethan, as if to say, "I'm ready." With a mixture of pride and anxiety, Ethan clipped a leash to Scout's collar and opened the door. For the first time, they walked out into the world together, not as strangers, but as partners, taking the first steps toward trust and healing. As they returned home, Ethan knelt beside Scout and scratched behind his ears. "Good job, Scout. We're getting there." Scout looked up at him, eyes bright, tail wagging just a little more freely. For the first time, Ethan felt a spark of hope, faint but real, that maybe, just maybe, they both could find their way back to the light. The days that followed were a delicate dance between hope and hesitation. Ethan and Scout found comfort in their new routines. Morning walks around the block, quiet afternoons with the radio humming softly, evenings spent by the window as golden light faded into night. With each passing day, Scout's eyes grew brighter, his tail wagged a little higher, and Ethan dared to believe that they might both be healing, if only by inches. But recovery, as Ethan knew too well, never moved in a straight line. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, just as the city was beginning to shake off its winter gloom. The sky was a crisp, cloudless blue. Ethan decided it was a good day to explore a new route. He clipped Scout's leash, grabbed his keys, and together they set out toward the park at the far edge of the neighborhood. Scout was skittish at first, tail tucked, pausing at every shadow and unfamiliar noise. But Ethan moved slowly, talking quietly, rewarding Scout with gentle words and the occasional treat. By the time they reached the park's leafy entrance, Scout was walking a little ahead, ears forward, nose working the air as if savoring the freedom. Ethan smiled, pride blooming in his chest. They followed a winding path through the trees, the city's noise muffled by leaves and birdsong. For a moment, It felt almost easy. The peace shattered as they rounded a corner and stumbled upon a city crew at work. The crew was repairing a broken water line, and two men in neon vests stood beside a massive jackhammer. Just as Ethan and Scout stepped from the shade, the machine roared to life, unleashing a deafening metallic clatter that cut through the air like a knife. The sound slammed into Scout with the force of a physical blow. In an instant, every muscle in the dog's body seized, his ears flattened, tail shot between his legs, and he dropped to the ground, eyes wide, limbs shaking. The leash went taut as Scout tried to back away, paws scrabbling frantically on the path. Ethan dropped to his knees, blocking Scout from bolting into the street. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here, I've got you," he said. But the words sounded weak even to his own ears, lost in the thunder of the jackhammer. Scout's breathing came in desperate, ragged pants. His eyes darted wildly, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The panic was total, overwhelming, leaving no room for reason or comfort. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, an echo of the helplessness he'd felt in the worst moments of his own trauma. He wrapped his arms around Scout, pulling the trembling dog against him, shielding him as best he could. Scout's body shook uncontrollably, claws digging into the soft dirt. Ethan stroked his head, murmuring whatever words came to mind. "You're safe, Scout. It's okay. You're with me. I've got you." The noise was unrelenting. Ethan threw a desperate look at the workers, one of whom caught his eye and, understanding, quickly signaled to shut off the jackhammer. The abrupt silence was jarring, but the damage was done. Scout remained paralyzed with fear, as if trapped in some private nightmare. Ethan waited, holding Scout close, letting the minutes tick by. Gradually, the dog's trembling slowed, his breathing eased, and his eyes lost their wild, glassy edge. But he made no move to stand. Ethan's heart broke at the sight. He could see it. Scout had been thrown right back into that dark place, the memory of the kennel, the drills, the pain and confusion. It was more than a setback. It was a reminder that healing would not be easy or quick. After what felt like hours, Ethan managed to coax Scout to his feet. The dog stayed glued to his side, tail still tightly tucked, every muscle tense. They made their way home in silence, Ethan moving slowly, his own thoughts a storm of worry and guilt. Had he pushed Scout too soon? Had he failed to protect him? Back at the apartment, Scout darted for his old spot by the radiator and curled into a trembling ball, shutting out the world. Ethan knelt beside him, hands gentle, but the dog flinched at his touch. The sight gutted Ethan. He settled on the floor nearby, careful not to crowd Scout, and sat in silence. The apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in, the air thick with disappointment. Ethan reached for his journal and wrote, his pen digging hard into the page. "Bad day. Scout panicked at the jackhammer. I couldn't help him. Feels like we're back at the start." The words bled frustration and helplessness. He closed the notebook, fighting the urge to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. He called his friend Sarah Jennings, a dog trainer he trusted. Her calm voice on the other end of the line was a lifeline. "He's not broken, Ethan. Neither are you," she said. "This is what trauma looks like. It doesn't erase all the progress. It just means you both need time, and maybe a little help." That night, Ethan left the apartment lights low and the radio off, sitting on the floor near Scout, saying nothing, just offering his presence. He watched as Scout, eventually, opened his eyes and watched him back, the smallest glimmer of trust flickering through the fear. Ethan knew they would have to take new steps, maybe different ones, maybe slower, but giving up wasn't an option. Before bed, Ethan sat beside Scout, speaking softly into the stillness. "We'll try again, buddy, no matter how many times it takes." Scout didn't respond, but his breathing slowed, and he didn't flinch when Ethan's hand rested nearby. The night passed quietly, but sleep didn't come easy. Ethan lay awake on the couch, listening to Scout's soft whimpers and the distant hum of the city. He wondered if he'd ever truly move past his own fears, or if he was just as lost as Scout. Yet beneath the worry, there was a stubborn ember of resolve. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. And in the dark, as Scout finally drifted into a restless but deeper sleep, Ethan made a silent promise. To keep fighting, to keep hoping, even when it hurt. Because that's what you did for those you cared about. And tomorrow, they would begin again. Together. The morning after the panic attack, sunlight poured into the apartment, banishing the shadows that had haunted the long night. Scout remained curled by the radiator, flinching at every noise. His eyes seemed to plead with Ethan. "Don't make me go out there again." Ethan's heart ached, not just for Scout, but for himself. He recognized that fear all too well. Sometimes, even the strongest willpower wasn't enough to climb out of the darkness alone. Ethan spent the morning weighing his options. He'd reached the limits of what he could do by himself. His mind kept returning to the phone call with Sarah Jennings, the trainer he trusted. Sarah's words echoed in his head. "This is what trauma looks like. It doesn't erase all the progress. It just means you both need time, and maybe a little help." Ethan knew Sarah's ranch out on the city's edge wasn't a miracle cure, but he needed hope, and so did Scout. By noon, Ethan had packed a bag with Scout's few belongings: a chewed tennis ball, his battered firefighter jacket, a well-loved bowl. He crouched beside Scout, speaking softly. "We're going to see a friend today. She helps dogs like you. I think she can help us too." Scout didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on Ethan, as if searching for reassurance. The drive to Sarah's ranch was quiet, with Scout lying in the back seat, head pressed against the door, body tense but not panicked. The city gave way to open fields and winding roads, the air fragrant with cut grass and wildflowers. Ethan felt his own chest loosen as the concrete faded behind them. He glanced in the rearview mirror and caught Scout's eyes. There was a flicker of curiosity there, beneath the fear. Sarah's rehabilitation ranch sprawled across 10 acres of rolling hills, bordered by white fences and ancient oaks. As Ethan pulled into the gravel drive, he felt the tension in his own shoulders ease. This place was the opposite of the harsh kennels in Scout's nightmares. Here the world moved at a gentle pace. A chorus of birds filled the air, and the only barking came from happy dogs playing in a distant field. Sarah greeted them at the gate, her presence calm and grounded. She was in her late 40s, with a sunburned face, kind eyes, and a patience that seemed to radiate from her every gesture. She knelt to Scout's level, not trying to touch him or make eye contact right away. Instead, she let him watch her, reading his body language. "Hi, Scout. I'm Sarah. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," she said softly, her tone almost a whisper. Ethan watched as Scout studied her, the way she never reached toward him or invaded his space. She just let him be, letting silence do the work of trust building. Ethan and Sarah sat on a bench beneath a sprawling oak, with Scout lying a few feet away, head on paws. "He's been through a lot," Ethan said, voice thick with emotion. He told Sarah everything, about finding Scout, the wounds, the panic attack in the park, the slow steps toward trust at home. Sarah listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her eyes never leaving Scout. He's got the scars of a working dog, she observed, pointing gently to the faded tattoo on Scout's ear. He's seen too much, too young. But you're right to bring him here. The ranch is a good place for dogs with old ghosts. They let Scout explore at his own pace. The ranch was a world apart from the chaos of the city. Lush green fields, soft breezes, and the distant sound of other animals. There were no harsh commands, no sudden noises, just gentle encouragement. Sarah invited Ethan to walk the grounds with her, Scout trailing behind them, always keeping Ethan in sight. It was slow going, but every minute was a tiny victory. After an hour, Sarah finally sat down in the grass and waited. She placed a hand on the ground, open and relaxed. Scout circled her, nose twitching, wary but curious. When he finally inched close enough, Sarah remained perfectly still, letting him decide when to make contact. Eventually, Scout pressed his nose against her hand. Sarah smiled but didn't move, respecting the hard-won trust he'd offered. "That's it," she murmured. "He's got a strong sense of self-preservation, but I can see he's smart, and he remembers everything." She glanced at Ethan. Dogs like Scout, they don't just forget, but they can learn new associations. You're already halfway there. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Watching Sarah work with Scout, he realized how much he'd been carrying. The fear that he was failing, that Scout's pain would never ease. But here, under the open sky, surrounded by gentle sounds and patient voices, hope felt possible again. Sarah introduced Scout to a small herd of gentle therapy dogs. She explained to Ethan that dogs like Scout often learned best from observing others. As the group played quietly, Scout watched from a safe distance. He flinched at sudden movements, but didn't retreat. Curiosity tugged at him. One of the older dogs, a golden retriever named Max, ambled over and flopped down beside Scout, ignoring him in that wise dog way that said, "I'm here if you need me." After a few minutes, Scout shifted closer, inch by inch, until he lay alongside Max. Sarah smiled at Ethan. He wants to belong. It's just going to take time. The afternoon wore on in gentle rhythms. Ethan found himself talking with Sarah about Axel, about his own struggles since leaving the military, about the way trauma never truly lets go. It just grows quieter, easier to live with, when shared. Sarah listened, sometimes offering a word, sometimes just her steady presence. "Healing is a circle," she said. "We think we're here to fix the dogs, but they end up saving us too." As the sun dipped lower, Scout approached Sarah once more. This time, when she reached out, he didn't flinch. She ran a careful hand down his back, fingers finding knots of tension, pausing on old scars. "You're a survivor, Scout. You're not alone anymore," she whispered. Ethan watched the scene with a swelling sense of gratitude. For the first time, Scout seemed to relax in a stranger's company. He looked to Ethan, then to Sarah, and let out a long, slow breath, a surrender not to fear, but to safety. Sarah outlined a plan for Scout's rehabilitation: gradual exposure to new environments, guided socialization with other dogs, structured play. She explained the importance of patience and consistency, reminding Ethan that setbacks would come but didn't mean failure. When it was time to leave, Scout followed Ethan to the car with only a small hesitation. He glanced back at Sarah, and for the first time since arriving, his tail wagged. Not much, but enough to say thank you. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes as he opened the car door, and Scout hopped in without protest. On the drive home, the air in the car felt different, lighter, full of possibility. Ethan glanced back at Scout, meeting his gaze in the rearview mirror. "We're going to be okay, Scout," he whispered. The dog's eyes were calm, steady, no longer haunted by panic. That night, as they returned to the apartment, Ethan watched Scout curl up by the radiator, but with his head lifted, eyes tracking Ethan's movements with something like trust. As Ethan wrote in his journal, "Sarah says Scout has intelligence, memory, and hope." He realized that healing had truly begun for both of them. And outside, beneath the endless sky, the world felt just a little bit wider. The following weeks became a masterclass in patience and quiet victories. Sarah's ranch transformed into Scout's sanctuary. Under Sarah's careful guidance, Scout learned to move through new spaces without fear. First the fenced meadows, then the open yards where wind and sunlight danced together. Each day brought a new challenge, always at Scout's pace, with Sarah and Ethan never pushing too hard or too fast. It was clear to everyone at the ranch that Scout was different from the other dogs. He watched everything, cataloging every movement, every voice, every scent. His intelligence wasn't just a glimmer. It shone through in the way he solved puzzles, learned routines, and anticipated both rewards and threats. The other dogs began to accept him as part of their pack. Old Max, the gentle retriever, often lay beside him under the shade of an oak, as if offering silent companionship. Scout watched Max's ease with humans, his relaxed wag, his calm when children visited, and slowly, those lessons sank in. Ethan came out to the ranch every day, sometimes bringing Scout's favorite toy or just himself, sitting on the bench while Sarah worked with the dogs. In the evenings, he and Sarah would share coffee on the porch, talking about Scout, about trauma, about the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. One morning, Sarah called Ethan over as Scout sat at her feet, tail flicking nervously. "He's come a long way, Ethan," she said. "But there's one more thing he needs, a test of trust, with you at the center. If he can make it through, I think he'll be ready for the world again." Ethan's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "Whatever it takes." Sarah outlined her plan. They would set up a trust challenge on the ranch's largest field, with Ethan waiting at the far end and Scout starting from the opposite side. The goal was simple. Scout would have to cross the field to reach Ethan, navigating a few gentle distractions along the way. Sarah explained, "It's not about obedience. It's about choosing trust, even when things get hard." The morning of the trust test dawned bright and blustery, with clouds racing overhead and sunlight streaking through the trees. Sarah and Ethan prepared the field. At the start, Scout sat beside Sarah, muscles tense, eyes scanning for danger. The ranch dogs lined the perimeter, silent observers, as if they understood the importance of what was about to happen. Ethan knelt at the far side, heart pounding, determined to project calm and reassurance. He tried to steady his breathing, remembering the first night he found Scout, the silent promise they'd made to each other. "I'm here, buddy," he called softly, voice carrying on the breeze. Sarah gave the signal. "Whenever you're ready, Scout." Scout hesitated, gaze flicking from Sarah to Ethan. The expanse of open field stretched out before him, a chasm filled with memories of fear and failure. For a moment he didn't move, paralyzed by indecision. Then, slowly, he took a step forward, then another, nose low, tail flicking with anxiety. He was halfway across when the world shifted. From the nearby road, the sharp crack of a car backfiring sliced through the air, a sound so close to the snap of a whip or the bark of a harsh command that it sent Scout reeling. His body froze, muscles locked, eyes wide with panic. The field, the sun, the voices, all of it faded beneath the roar of memory. Ethan's own chest tightened with dread, recognizing the signs of a full-blown trauma response. He called out, voice trembling but clear. "Scout, I'm here, you're safe. Come to me, buddy." Scout trembled, torn between the urge to flee and the longing to trust. His mind flashed through images of pain, betrayal, endless drills, and harsh hands. But then he heard Ethan's voice, steady, certain, warm, and something shifted. Scout's head rose, his ears flicked forward, and his gaze locked on Ethan. In that moment, 1,000 silent promises passed between them. You're not alone. I won't let you fall. With a sudden, desperate burst, Scout surged forward, paws churning the grass, every muscle straining against fear. He ran, faster and faster, eyes fixed on Ethan's outstretched arms. The other dogs barked encouragement, their voices a chorus that pushed him onward. Scout's legs wobbled as he closed the final distance. But he didn't stop, didn't falter. He leapt into Ethan's embrace, knocking him backward with the force of relief and love. Ethan wrapped his arms around Scout, tears blurring his vision. He buried his face in Scout's fur, laughing and sobbing all at once. You did it! You did it, buddy! I'm so proud of you! Sarah jogged over, grinning from ear to ear. That's it. That's the breakthrough we've been waiting for. She knelt beside them, her touch gentle as she stroked Scout's head. He chose trust. He chose you. Scout stayed pressed against Ethan's side, body trembling with adrenaline, but no longer paralyzed. The panic had passed, replaced by a sense of accomplishment, of belonging. For the first time, Scout let Sarah scratch behind his ears without flinching, even wagged his tail with shy pride. Sarah smiled at Ethan, her eyes bright. He's ready for the next step. I want to try reintroducing him to the public. There's a community event next weekend. A demonstration for therapy dogs. It's a lot, but I think he's earned the chance. Ethan's breath caught. The idea of Scout facing crowds, noise, and chaos made his stomach twist with worry. But he saw the hope in Scout's eyes, the trust hard won and never taken for granted. He nodded. If you believe he can do it, then I do too. The days that followed were filled with practice. Sarah staged small challenges, recorded sounds of traffic, children laughing, applause. Each time Scout wavered, but he always found Ethan's face, always pushed through the fear. The other dogs supported him, their calm presence a reminder that the world could be safe, even joyful. On the eve of the event, Ethan sat with Scout beneath the stars, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. Tomorrow's a big day, buddy, he whispered. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. Scout pressed closer, sighing. His body relaxed in a way that spoke volumes. He had survived more than most, had been broken and remade by pain. But now he had something new, something precious. Trust, belonging, family. Ethan gazed at the night sky, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The morning of the community event dawned crisp and clear, sunlight pouring across Sarah's ranch in golden waves. Ethan woke early, nerves buzzing beneath his calm exterior. He watched Scout doze by the window, the dog's breath slow and even, body sprawled in the warmth. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to simply watch, marveling at how far Scout had come. Just a few weeks ago, Scout flinched at the sound of footsteps. Now he slept peacefully, trusting that morning would bring safety and routine. The day's plans called for a short drive into town, where the local park would host families, volunteers, and several therapy dogs for a public demonstration. Sarah had explained everything. There would be children, music, loudspeakers, and a swirl of activity. Ethan prepared Scout's favorite blanket, a fresh bowl, and the old firefighter's jacket that had become the dog's security anchor. As he clipped the leash, Scout looked up, ears perking, tail giving a tentative wag. "You ready, Scout?" Ethan asked, crouching to meet the dog's gaze. "Whatever happens out there, you've already won. Let's just go show them who you are." He pressed his forehead gently to Scout's, breathing in the familiar scent of fur and courage. The ranch's van pulled out onto the main road, Sarah at the wheel, Ethan and Scout in the back. They drove past fields ablaze with wildflowers and rolling green hills, the sky impossibly blue overhead. For the first time, Ethan noticed that Scout's eyes weren't wide with anxiety. They held curiosity, even excitement. The old wounds, visible and invisible, seemed to loosen their grip as the town came into view. When they arrived, the park was alive with energy. Tents dotted the grass, kids raced around with balloons, and the hum of anticipation filled the air. Sarah led them to the staging area, where volunteers and other therapy dogs waited. Scout's nose twitched as he took in the new scents, his ears flicking back and forth with each new sound. There was tension, yes, but also determination. Ethan knelt beside him, hand steady on Scout's shoulder. "Just like we practiced," he whispered, voice calm. "Find my face. Listen for my voice." He felt his own nerves settle as Scout pressed into his side, anchoring himself with Ethan's presence. The demonstration was scheduled for midday, but fate had other plans. As the event unfolded, news swept through the crowd. A child had gone missing. The little boy, no more than 7, had wandered away during the chaos, slipping past the edge of the park and into the bordering woods. The search started small, parents calling, volunteers fanning out, officials with radios moving swiftly, but panic built as minutes ticked by. Sarah rushed over, eyes searching for Ethan. "Ethan, this is it. The sheriff's here. He knows Scout's history, but he's desperate. They need any dog willing to help." Ethan looked at Scout, who was already on his feet, muscles coiled, nose lifted to the breeze. Something in his posture had changed. A shift from anxious pet to alert working dog, a purpose awakening in every line of his body. Ethan clipped on the special search harness Sarah handed him, eyes never leaving Scout's. "You up for this?" he asked, voice soft but urgent. Scout's response was immediate, a determined huff, tail straight, eyes locked forward. The sheriff gave a quick briefing. "Boy's name is Jamie. Last seen by the north fence line, wearing a red shirt. We've got people searching, but the brush is thick. If your dog can track, we'll take all the help we can get." Sarah handed Ethan a shirt from the boy's backpack. Ethan let Scout sniff, watching as the dog's nostrils flared, his body focusing in on the task. Years of training, buried under trauma, but never truly lost, came flooding back. Scout whined softly, then surged forward, pulling Ethan toward the tree line. They moved quickly, Scout's nose close to the ground, every muscle working in perfect coordination. The world shrank to a tunnel of scent and sound. Ethan's voice quietly encouraging, Sarah a few paces behind with the sheriff and a paramedic. Scout led them through tangled undergrowth, around fallen logs, deeper into the woods than anyone had expected a child to go. Minutes felt like hours as they pressed on. Ethan's heart hammered, old fears whispering at the edges of his mind. What if they were too late? What if Scout faltered? But every time doubt rose, Scout pulled harder, driven by something deeper than memory, driven by hope, by the bond between him and Ethan, by the need to save just one more lost soul. Suddenly, Scout stopped, head snapping up, ears rigid. He let out a low bark and veered off the main path, leading the team through a thicket of brambles. Ethan followed, breath ragged, limbs scratched and bleeding. Then, in a small clearing dappled with sunlight, they found him. Jamie sat curled beneath a pine tree, face streaked with tears, shirt torn, clutching a battered teddy bear. Ethan fell to his knees, voice gentle. "Jamie, my name's Ethan. This is Scout. You're safe now. We're here to help." Jamie's eyes widened as Scout approached, tail wagging, posture low and friendly. Instead of flinching, the boy reached out, burying his hands in Scout's fur. Scout settled beside him, lying close, body forming a barrier between Jamie and the world. The paramedic hurried over, checking for injuries. Jamie clung to Scout the whole time, the dog's calm presence soothing his trembling hands. The walk back to the park was slow but triumphant. As they emerged from the trees, a cheer rose from the crowd. Parents, volunteers, children, and strangers all gathered to welcome Jamie and his unlikely hero. News cameras rolled, capturing Scout's muddy paws and gentle eyes. The local paper snapped photos as Jamie hugged Scout's neck, whispering a thank you only the dog could hear. Reporters flocked to Ethan and Sarah, questions flying. "What's his name? How did he know? Has he always been this brave?" Sarah beamed. "This is Scout, the silent hero. He's been through a lot, but today he found his purpose again." The mayor stepped forward, shaking Ethan's hand and kneeling to stroke Scout's head. "We're honored to have you in our community. Today you reminded us all of the power of hope and the courage of a dog who never gave up." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Scout was invited to take center stage at the demonstration. The crowd fell silent as Ethan led him into the ring. For a moment, Scout hesitated, glancing up at Ethan, who smiled and whispered, "Go on, buddy. Show them what you can do." Scout moved through the obstacles with grace, completing each task with a quiet confidence. At the final platform, he sat tall, looking out at the sea of faces, no longer a victim, but a hero. The applause was thunderous. Children crowded the fence, reaching out to touch Scout, calling his name. The local news dubbed him the silent hero, and offers poured in for him to demonstrate at more events, to help other dogs and people facing their own battles with fear and loss. Back at home that night, Ethan knelt beside Scout, pressing his face into the dog's fur. "You did it, Scout. You saved him. You found yourself again." Scout wagged his tail and licked Ethan's cheek, content and proud. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to believe. Scout's pain had given way to purpose. His story, once defined by suffering, was now written in courage and hope. They sat together in the quiet, a man and his dog, united not just by trauma, but by the healing they'd found in each other. Outside, the world felt new, alive with possibility. And Scout, the silent hero, slept soundly, dreaming not of fear, but of the many lives still waiting to be changed. The days after Scout's rescue of little Jamie passed in a golden blur, the world opening up in ways Ethan could never have predicted. Scout's story became local news, then spread far beyond the city limits. Videos of the search and the tearful reunion played on phones and TV screens, strangers sending messages of support, encouragement, and awe. Children at the park carried handmade drawings of Scout, dubbing him the silent hero with crayon banners and crooked hearts. It seemed as if, overnight, Scout had gone from a shadow to a beacon, a symbol of hope not just for those who loved him, but for an entire community hungry for stories of redemption. But the most profound transformation unfolded far from the noise of cameras and applause, in the quiet moments Ethan and Scout shared together. The apartment, once so heavy with silence and ghosts, now felt lighter, every corner brightened by Scout's presence. Each morning, sunlight found Scout stretched on the rug, breathing deeply, twitching only in dreams of green fields and running with Max and the other dogs at Sarah's ranch. At night, the space was filled with an easy stillness as Ethan read, wrote in his journal, or simply sat with Scout's head in his lap, the weight of the dog's trust grounding him in the present. The bond between man and dog grew into something that neither had expected, a partnership forged not just in shared pain, but in shared healing. Scout, once so quick to flinch, now greeted Ethan with a wagging tail and a joyful bark. His eyes sparkled with curiosity when visitors came, especially children, who flocked to pet him and whisper their thanks. Each encounter was a quiet test, a reminder of how far they'd both come. Sarah's suggestion for the public demonstration had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. But now Ethan saw the wisdom in her plan. The upcoming community event would be bigger than anything Scout had faced. A crowded auditorium, bright lights, clapping, the unpredictable chaos of people and noise. It would be the final trial, not just of Scout's recovery, but of Ethan's willingness to step back into the world and share their journey. The day of the event arrived with a cloudless sky and the fresh scent of possibility in the air. The city's rec center buzzed with activity, volunteers setting up rows of chairs, microphones, and banners. Scout wore his new harness, its badge reading "Therapy Dog in Training," while Ethan smoothed the dog's fur and whispered words of reassurance. "We're in this together, pal," just like always. Inside, the crowd pressed in. Children, parents, veterans, city officials. The noise was immense, echoing off the high ceilings, the lights burning brighter than anything Scout had ever faced. For a moment he faltered, body tense, eyes wide, tail tucked with uncertainty. Ethan knelt down, blocking out the world. "You're not alone. I'm right here," he said, voice steady. With a deep breath, Scout stepped forward, nose lifted, drawing comfort from Ethan's nearness. Together they approached the demonstration ring. A burst of applause greeted them, the lights momentarily blinding. Scout paused, every instinct urging him to retreat, but Ethan's hand rested on his shoulder, an anchor in the storm. The demonstration began with simple exercises. Scout weaving between cones, sitting for children to pet him, calmly ignoring loud noises piped in over the speakers. Each task was a gauntlet, a confrontation with old fears, but Scout met them all, sometimes trembling, sometimes hesitating, but never quitting. The crowd watched in breathless silence, some moved to tears by the courage on display. Midway through, a toddler began to cry, overstimulated by the noise and lights, his sobs filling the auditorium. Scout, halfway through an obstacle course, stopped. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Ethan felt his own heart clench, remembering nights when he too had been paralyzed by fear, unable to move forward. But then, Scout turned from the course and walked directly to the child, lowering himself until his head rested in the boy's lap. The child's sobs faded, replaced by a hiccuping giggle as he clung to Scout's neck. The audience erupted in applause, but Scout seemed to hear only the small, grateful voice whispering, "Thank you, doggy." It was a moment that lived beyond words, a silent triumph that needed no explanation. The rest of the demonstration passed in a blur of cheers, handshakes, and congratulations. As the crowd pressed in for photos, Scout barked, a confident, joyous sound that echoed through the room. For Ethan, the noise faded into the background, replaced by the quiet realization that this journey had changed him as deeply as it had changed his dog. Later, as the event wound down, Sarah found Ethan and Scout in a quiet hallway, away from the crowds. She knelt beside Scout, stroking his head. "You did it. Both of you," she said, voice thick with pride. "You didn't just survive. You grew. You made this place better." Ethan wiped at his eyes, laughter and relief bubbling in his chest. "I never thought I'd see the day," he admitted. "I thought I was too broken. I thought he was. But look at us now." Sarah smiled. "Healing is never just about one person or one dog. You both taught each other how to trust again." Ethan nodded, understanding in his bones that what they'd accomplished was not just a rehabilitation, but a rebirth. Scout's transformation was more than overcoming trauma. It was a living metaphor for what's possible when love, patience, and hope take root. Scout had reclaimed his sense of purpose, moving from the isolation of pain to the pride of belonging. And in doing so, he'd led Ethan out of his own shadows, teaching him that real healing happens in connection, in community, in the courage to try again. As the rec center emptied and dusk settled over the city, Ethan and Scout walked home together, side by side. The quiet between them was filled not with ghosts, but with the promise of new beginnings. That night, Ethan wrote in his journal, his words flowing freely for the first time in years. "Scout faced the world today and didn't flinch. I watched him comfort a child, inspire a crowd, and, most of all, stand tall in his own story. I used to think redemption meant erasing the past, but I see now that it means embracing it, learning from it, and using it to help others heal. Scout and I did this together. We aren't the same as we were. We're better." Scout slept at the foot of the bed, snoring softly, a smile curling his lips even in sleep. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of each breath, a rhythm of hope that promised tomorrow would be brighter than yesterday. And somewhere deep inside, a broken soldier and a battered dog both knew healing was not just surviving, but transforming, and the journey was far from over. The seasons changed with quiet grace, carrying Ethan and Scout into a new chapter neither of them had imagined possible when they first met on that rain-soaked night beneath the dumpster. Their story of pain and survival, of fear and hope, of brokenness and healing, had rippled out into the world, touching strangers and neighbors alike. But their lives, now woven together in a tapestry of trust, continued to evolve in the small, meaningful ways that make up real redemption. Scout's transformation didn't end with the community demonstration. In fact, it was only the beginning. Word spread about the silent hero, the once abused dog who had not only survived the worst that humanity could offer, but who had risen above it to comfort others. Soon, invitations poured in from local children's hospitals, veterans centers, and trauma recovery programs. Ethan, once hesitant to step back into the world, found himself guiding Scout through corridors bright with hope and possibility. Their first visit was to a pediatric cancer ward, where rooms were painted with rainbows and stars, and children faced the unimaginable with resilience that reminded Ethan of Scout's own courage. As they entered the ward, children clustered at the doorway, eyes shining. Scout, harness shining with its new, certified therapy dog tag, walked calmly at Ethan's side, stopping patiently so each child could stroke his soft fur or whisper secrets into his ear. One little girl, bald from treatment, hugged Scout fiercely and announced to everyone in earshot, "He's magic! My pain feels better when he's here." The nurses wept quietly, and Ethan blinked back his own tears, watching Scout's gentle presence soothe even the most restless souls. Next, they visited a veterans center. There, the audience was quieter, older, burdened with memories they rarely spoke of. Ethan recognized the haunted look in many faces, a mirror of the pain he'd carried since Axel's death and his own discharge from service. When he introduced Scout and shared their journey, The room listened with rapt attention. Afterward, as Scout made his rounds, old soldiers told stories they hadn't spoken aloud in years, their hands steady as they scratched behind Scout's ears. Some, Ethan learned, would start therapy after meeting Scout, encouraged by the evidence that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and trust. Ethan himself changed in ways both subtle and profound. The act of sharing Scout's story forced him to confront his own pain, to process loss, guilt, and the slow crawl of hope. He began speaking at events, not as an expert, but as someone who had walked the road from despair to recovery. His message was never polished, never rehearsed, but always honest. Redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about finding meaning in what comes after, and using your pain to help someone else. Audiences responded with gratitude, and many reached out to adopt or foster trauma-affected animals, inspired by Scout's resilience. One sunny afternoon, the mayor's office called. They wanted to honor Scout at the annual community ceremony, awarding him a medal for bravery and service. On the day of the event, the town square was filled with families, city officials, and more children than Ethan could count. Balloons floated overhead, banners read, "Thank you, Scout," and laughter danced on the breeze. When Ethan and Scout took the stage, applause washed over them in a wave. But Scout seemed unfazed, eyes focused only on Ethan. The mayor spoke first. Scout's journey is a reminder to us all. The smallest act of kindness can spark a transformation, not just for one life, but for many. Scout did not choose his pain, but he chose to trust again. And in doing so, he became a healer. As the medal was placed around Scout's neck, Ethan knelt beside him, unable to stop smiling through the tears. He whispered, "We made it, buddy. We really did." Scout nuzzled his hand, his tail wagging softly, proud and content. As the ceremony ended, Ethan took the microphone. He hesitated for only a moment, then spoke from the heart. Scout's story is not just about a dog. It's about the power of compassion, patience, and second chances. If you've ever felt broken or alone, I hope you'll remember this. Healing happens when we reach out, to others and to ourselves. If a forgotten dog can change his fate, so can we. He paused, scanning the crowd, parents holding children, teenagers filming on their phones, veterans with hands clasped in their laps. If you're able, support your local animal rescues. Consider adopting or fostering a dog who needs a second chance. Volunteer at a shelter or donate to therapy dog programs. And if you know someone who's hurting, human or animal, don't turn away. Sometimes all it takes is one gentle touch, one act of kindness, to change a life forever. The crowd erupted in applause. But for Ethan, the true reward came later, as people approached to share their own stories of loss, hope, and healing. He realized then that Scout's legacy was much larger than a single act of bravery. It was a call to action, a beacon for anyone teetering on the edge of despair. Back home that night, Ethan and Scout curled together on the old couch, the firefighter jacket now worn smooth by time and love. Ethan stroked Scout's head and reflected on everything that had brought them here. The storms weathered, the setbacks faced, the quiet moments of trust earned inch by inch. He opened his journal and wrote the final entry for the story they had lived. Scout taught me that redemption is not a destination, but a journey. It's a series of small, brave choices, a paw placed in an open hand, a trembling voice reaching out to say, "I need help." True healing is never solitary. It is co-created, messy, and often uncertain. But when we open our hearts, when we choose to care, we become part of something bigger than ourselves. Scout changed my life, and together we changed the world for a few others too. That's a legacy I'll carry forever. As Scout drifted into sleep, his breathing deep and even, Ethan watched the streetlights shimmer through the window. He knew the journey wasn't over. There would be other storms, other setbacks. But he also knew, with certainty, that they would face them together, stronger, braver, and more compassionate than before. And for anyone listening, anyone standing at the edge of hope, Scout's story remained an open invitation. Reach out, take a chance, and believe in the power of kindness to rewrite even the hardest stories.